The world was at peace. It was a time of progress and harmony, a time when people believed they were invincible. Nations had grown stronger, technology had advanced, and people lived with an unshakable belief in their own strength. But that peace was about to be shattered by something they never saw coming. It started small. A virus was detected in a distant part of the world, in a small town few had ever heard of. At first, it was just another story in the news. People were falling ill, showing strange symptoms, but the authorities didn't worry too much. They thought it would be like any other outbreak. They didn't know how wrong they were. The virus spread quickly, faster than anyone could have predicted. Within days, it crossed borders, infecting thousands, then millions. Cities became battlegrounds, filled with panic, fear, and confusion. Hospitals were overcrowded, and medical staff were overwhelmed. People didn't know who to trust, and even the bravest found themselves unable to stop the spread. The world had never seen anything like it. Lucas, a young scientist working at a research facility, had been following the virus from the beginning. He had always been fascinated by biology and viruses, and when the outbreak began, he knew it was serious. But even he was unprepared for how quickly it would escalate. His team worked tirelessly, hoping to find a cure, a way to stop the virus from destroying everything they knew. But every effort failed. The virus mutated faster than they could track it, and its effects were worse than anything they could have imagined. It wasn't just that people were getting sick, it was how they were getting sick. The virus didn't just kill, it changed people. It turned them into something else, something dangerous. It didn't matter if you were healthy or weak, young or old. The virus didn't discriminate. Once infected, the body would begin to deteriorate, but not in the way most diseases did. People would lose their will, their sense of self. It was as if the virus was stripping away their humanity, leaving behind only a shell. It was terrifying to watch, and even worse to imagine. The first signs of panic began in the cities. People were desperate, trying to escape the infection. But there was nowhere to run. The virus spread so quickly that there was no place that was safe. Governments declared states of emergency, but that only made things worse. Law enforcement struggled to maintain order as riots broke out in the streets. Food and supplies ran out, and society began to crumble. In just a few short weeks, the world was no longer the place it had been. It had become a nightmare. Lucas had always believed in the power of science to solve problems. But now, even science seemed helpless. He watched helplessly as his colleagues worked around the clock, trying to find a solution. Yet the virus always seemed one step ahead. Every time they thought they had made a breakthrough, the virus would mutate again, leaving them with nothing. The despair in the lab was palpable. They were all starting to realize the truth. They might not be able to stop this. The world might be lost. One night, as Lucas sat alone in his office, he received a call from his friend and colleague, Dr. Mia Harris. She had been studying the virus from a different angle, and her voice on the phone was filled with urgency. "Lucas," she said, "I found something. I think I know what's causing the mutations, but it's not natural. This virus wasn't created by nature." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? Are you saying someone made this virus?" Mia paused for a moment before speaking again. "Yes, and I think I know who." The next few days were a blur. Lucas and Mia worked together, digging deeper into the virus's origins. What they uncovered was nothing short of shocking. The virus was not the result of a natural event, like a mutation or an animal-to-human transfer. It had been engineered, created by someone with a plan far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. They discovered that the virus was designed to do more than just kill or infect. It was created to control. Its purpose was to weaken humanity, to break their spirits, to strip away their sense of self. The virus wasn't just about wiping out civilization. It was about reshaping it, manipulating it from the inside out. The person, or group, responsible for this had a far-reaching goal in mind. and Lucas had no idea how far they were willing to go to achieve it. The realization hit Lucas like a thunderclap. The virus had spread so quickly because it had been strategically released. It wasn't an accident. It was a carefully planned operation. And the worst part was that they had no idea who was behind it. The virus was too advanced for anyone to trace its origin. Whoever had made it had covered their tracks well, hiding in the shadows, letting the virus do the work while they remained faceless. As the days passed, the situation grew worse. People continued to fall ill, and the death toll climbed. But something else was happening too, something strange. The virus seemed to be doing more than just infecting the body. There were reports of people who had been infected showing signs of strange behavior, as if they were no longer themselves. There were stories of people acting as though they were under some kind of control, following orders, moving as if they were part of a larger force. Lucas had heard rumors, but he didn't want to believe it. It was too unbelievable. Yet, as he dug deeper into his research, he couldn't deny what he was seeing. The virus was doing something even more terrifying. It was hijacking human minds. As the first 5 to 7 minutes of this terrifying new world passed, Lucas realized that the virus was only the beginning. There was something darker at play, something far more dangerous. The chaos that had descended upon the world was not an accident. It had been orchestrated by someone with a plan. But who? And why? With no answers, and the world on the brink of collapse, Lucas found himself at the center of a battle for survival. He knew that if he didn't find a way to stop this virus, humanity's future would be wiped out. But the question lingered in his mind. Was the virus truly the enemy? Or was there something far worse waiting in the shadows? The struggle had only just begun. The virus spread like wildfire. And soon, it wasn't just a distant fear. It was a reality that everyone was facing. In the beginning, it seemed as though the world would be able to handle the outbreak. People thought they could contain it, just as they had with other viruses in the past. But this was different. This virus was not like anything they had ever encountered. It didn't just spread through the air or water. It infected people in ways no one could predict. In the first few days, there was a strange sense of disbelief. People couldn't quite grasp what was happening. Governments acted quickly to impose quarantines, and the military was called in to enforce order. But there was no escaping the truth. The virus had already reached every corner of the globe. Lucas, along with his team of scientists, had spent every waking hour researching the virus. They tried everything, from vaccine trials to quarantine measures, but nothing worked. Each time they thought they were getting closer to a cure, the virus mutated into something new, something more dangerous. Desperation grew as cities fell one by one. News reports from around the world showed scenes of people falling ill in the streets. Hospitals were overrun, and healthcare workers were stretched beyond their limits. There was no room for hope. Those who were infected seemed to lose everything. First their health, then their minds, and in some cases, even their will to live. It wasn't just that people were dying. It was as if the virus was taking away their humanity, turning them into something unrecognizable. The government's attempts to maintain order failed. Riots broke out as panic spread like wildfire. People didn't know who to trust anymore. The world was falling apart, and no one could figure out how to stop it. Lucas could feel the pressure weighing on him, knowing that the fate of humanity might rest in his hands. But he didn't have all the answers. He didn't even have a clear plan. Every lead he followed seemed to end in failure. The world was slipping through his fingers, and all he could do was watch. Then, a breakthrough came. At least, that's what they thought at first. Mia, Lucas's colleague, had been studying the virus's behavior in great detail, searching for patterns, trying to understand why it was mutating so rapidly. It was during one of her late-night research sessions that she stumbled upon a terrifying possibility. The virus wasn't natural. Someone had designed it. The virus wasn't just a random event. It had been engineered. Someone somewhere had intentionally created it to spread, to mutate, and to destroy humanity. Lucas couldn't believe it at first. How could something like this be done on purpose? Who could be behind such an act? The thought of it was too horrific to imagine. Yet the evidence was there. The virus didn't behave like a normal virus. It was too precise, too calculated in its spread. And worst of all, it seemed to be adapting to every attempt to stop it. The fact that it was engineered meant that it wasn't a natural disaster they were dealing with. It was a weapon. The news hit Lucas like a punch to the stomach. Humanity wasn't just fighting a virus. They were fighting an enemy they couldn't see, an enemy that was hidden in the shadows. The virus had been released deliberately. And now, the world was suffering the consequences. As the days dragged on, Lucas's sense of urgency grew. He knew that the more the virus spread, the harder it would be to find a solution. People were dying at an alarming rate, and yet the virus kept mutating, adapting to every effort made to stop it. The world was on the edge of collapse. It was only a matter of time before it completely fell apart. Lucas and Mia worked tirelessly, trying to find a way to slow the virus down, trying to find any kind of pattern they could use to their advantage. But the virus was always one step ahead. They began to realize that they were no longer in control. Every test, every theory, every piece of data seemed to lead them further into a dead end. The virus had already evolved to the point where it could resist everything they threw at it. But there was one thing they hadn't counted on. The virus was affecting people in ways they hadn't expected. It wasn't just killing people, it was changing them. Lucas had heard rumors of strange behavior among the infected, but he hadn't wanted to believe them. However, as the virus spread, the stories became impossible to ignore. There were reports of infected individuals not just losing their health, but also their sense of self. They were following orders, acting like they were part of something greater than themselves. It was as if the virus had hijacked their minds, controlling them like puppets. Lucas and Mia sat in stunned silence as they processed this new information. The virus wasn't just a physical illness. It was a mental one, too. It was taking away people's free will, turning them into mere vessels for something else. But what was controlling them, and why? As these questions flooded Lucas's mind, he realized that they weren't just fighting a virus anymore. They were fighting an unknown enemy, one that had planned this attack on humanity from the very beginning. It wasn't just the virus that they needed to worry about. It was the force behind it, the one pulling the strings. With every passing hour, the situation grew more dire. Lucas knew that if they didn't act quickly, the world would be lost forever. The virus was spreading faster than they could track it, and with each new mutation, it became harder to find a solution. The future was uncertain, and the stakes had never been higher. As he sat in the lab, staring at the screen in front of him, Lucas couldn't help but wonder if there was any hope left. The virus had already taken so much, and now, it seemed as though it was on the brink of taking everything. He couldn't afford to waste any more time. The world was running out of chances. If he didn't find a way to stop this, humanity might be doomed. The first signs of resistance were already showing. People in various parts of the world had begun to form underground groups, trying to hold on to what was left of their societies. But those groups were becoming increasingly desperate. The world was losing the fight, and Lucas could feel the weight of that truth with every breath he took. But despite everything, he couldn't give up. He knew that somewhere, somehow, there had to be an answer. The virus was deadly, yes, but it wasn't unbeatable. If they could just figure out how to stop it, if they could just find the source, they might still have a chance. But every second that passed made that chance slimmer and slimmer. Time was running out, and with it, humanity's hope. The world seemed to be spiraling out of control. With each passing day, the virus spread further, infecting more people, mutating in ways that baffled even the most seasoned scientists. Lucas watched helplessly as cities that had once been bustling centers of life were now silent and abandoned. Streets that were once full of people were now empty, save for the occasional group of survivors wandering in search of food or safety. The once bright future of humanity now felt like a distant memory. As he sat in the lab with Mia, a growing sense of dread hung over them both. They had tried everything. Every theory, every treatment, every possible solution had been exhausted. The virus was still out there, growing stronger, adapting faster than they could comprehend. Lucas felt like they were trapped in a nightmare with no way out. The discovery Mia had made about the virus being engineered had only deepened the mystery, but it had also opened a door to a horrifying possibility. If someone had created the virus, that meant they were controlling it. They had a purpose, and that purpose was becoming clearer with each passing moment. This wasn't just an outbreak. This was a carefully planned attack. But who could do such a thing? Why would anyone unleash something so devastating on the world? The team had been working non-stop, trying to find a way to stop the virus before it was too late. But every time they thought they were close, the virus mutated again, rendering their efforts useless. It was as if they were fighting an invisible enemy, one that was always one step ahead. In the midst of all this, a new idea began to form in Lucas's mind. What if they could use the virus itself? What if the key to stopping it was hidden within its very structure? It was a dangerous thought, one that went against everything they had been taught about viruses and cures. But desperate times called for desperate measures. Lucas brought the idea to Mia, hoping she would see the potential. At first, she was skeptical, even frightened by the idea. Using the virus itself was risky, maybe even more dangerous than the virus itself. But after some consideration, Mia agreed that it might be their only shot. They didn't have much time, and the world was running out of hope. If they could find a way to turn the virus's mutations against it, they might be able to stop it in its tracks. They worked day and night, poring over data, analyzing the virus's genetic structure, trying to find a way to manipulate it. It wasn't easy. Every experiment seemed to lead to failure. But Lucas refused to give up. He knew that if they didn't find a solution soon, humanity would be lost. Then, one night, as they were reviewing the most recent tests, Mia pointed something out. It was a small detail, almost insignificant, but it caught Lucas's attention. A pattern in the way the virus mutated. It wasn't random. The virus was following a specific sequence, as though it was being guided by something. It was almost as if the virus had a blueprint, a plan. And Lucas began to wonder, was the virus being controlled by something else? It was a chilling thought, but it also opened up a new line of investigation. If the virus had a master, someone, or something, was directing it, and if they could find that connection, they might finally be able to stop the virus for good. For days, Lucas and Mia followed every lead, no matter how small. They scored every piece of data, looking for a connection between the virus and its creator. They examined every report, every interview, hoping to uncover a clue. It was exhausting, both mentally and physically, but the more they dug, the more they realized they were getting closer. They could feel it. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place. One evening, after a long day of research, Lucas sat in front of his computer, staring at the data that had been collected. His mind was tired, but there was something there, something he hadn't noticed before. The virus had been released in several places around the world, almost simultaneously. The spread was too fast, too organized. And then it hit him. The virus wasn't just being spread by natural means. It was being delivered by something else, something with the resources and the ability to launch such an attack on a global scale. Lucas felt his heart race as he realized the truth. The virus was being distributed intentionally, methodically, by an organization with power beyond anything they had imagined. This wasn't some rogue scientist or group of extremists. This was a global operation, orchestrated by a force with far-reaching control. The implications were terrifying. Who could have the resources to pull something like this off? Who had the power to manipulate the world's population with such ease? Mia, who had been standing by his side, seemed to sense his realization. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice tinged with fear. Lucas didn't answer right away. His mind was racing. "It's not just a virus," he finally said, his voice low. "It's a weapon, and someone is using it to bring the world to its knees." Mia's face paled as the weight of his words sank in. She had suspected as much, but hearing it out loud made it all the more real. There was a moment of silence as both of them absorbed the enormity of the situation. They weren't just fighting a disease. They were up against something much more dangerous. An enemy with a plan, with a goal, and with the means to see it through. But there was one thing Lucas knew for sure. Whoever was behind this, they had underestimated humanity. The human spirit was not so easily crushed. If there was one thing that had always driven humans forward, it was the will to survive. And Lucas was determined to make sure that will would win. They had a long road ahead of them. The fight was far from over. But now, Lucas had a new sense of purpose. The stakes had never been higher. The world was on the edge of collapse, but humanity wasn't going to give up without a fight. In the midst of the chaos, in the face of overwhelming odds, Lucas and Mia had made a decision. They would not let the world fall. No matter what it took, no matter how high the cost, they would stop the virus. They would find the source, and they would take down the enemy. This was far from over. The battle had only just begun. And as the days wore on, Lucas couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. The darkness was closing in, but humanity was not done yet. The final act was still to come, and Lucas would see it through to the end. The world might be on the brink of destruction, but as long as there was breath in his lungs, he would fight for it. The days were becoming a blur for Lucas and Mia. They had uncovered a chilling truth. Humanity wasn't just battling a virus. They were fighting an orchestrated attack, one that had been carefully planned by a powerful, shadowy organization. But even with this knowledge, the question remained, who were these people, and what did they want? The virus had already spread to every corner of the globe. No place was safe. Governments were crumbling, and society was descending into chaos. Infected people roamed the streets, their behavior increasingly strange and robotic. The virus, as devastating as it was, had somehow turned the infected into puppets. They seemed to follow orders, move with a collective purpose, and act as though they were part of something much larger than themselves. Lucas and Mia were no closer to finding a cure. They had studied the virus from every angle. But the deeper they dug, the more they realized they were dealing with something beyond their comprehension. The virus wasn't just an illness. It was a tool, a weapon. And whoever was behind it had thought of everything. The idea that the virus could be controlled and manipulated by an outside force had been a horrifying realization. It wasn't just the virus that was the threat. It was the shadowy organization using it to break down humanity's resistance. But there was still so much they didn't know. Every piece of the puzzle seemed to raise more questions than answers. The one thing Lucas was sure of, however, was that this wasn't just a biological weapon. The virus was connected to something far more sinister. It was part of a larger plan, a strategy to take control of the world. Lucas and Mia had started piecing together fragments of intelligence, and while they hadn't yet cracked the identity of the enemy, they were slowly closing in. One evening, as Lucas pored over the latest data, an alert flashed across the screen. It was a report from a group of survivors in a remote part of the world. They claimed to have uncovered something that could help them find the source of the virus, a hidden facility deep in the mountains, far from civilization. The report was vague, but it was the first real lead they had received in days. Maya was skeptical at first. It could be a trap, another dead end, or even a false lead meant to send them on a wild goose chase. But Lucas, exhausted and desperate, couldn't ignore the glimmer of hope that the report offered. This could be their chance to finally uncover the truth. "Do you think it's real?" Maya asked, her voice filled with doubt. Lucas didn't hesitate. "It has to be. It's the only lead we have." Without wasting any time, they gathered what little equipment they had left and set out for the location. The journey would take them through dangerous, uncharted territory, where the virus was still rampant, and there was no guarantee they would even survive. But the thought of finding a way to end this nightmare was enough to push them forward. As they traveled, the world around them seemed more like a dystopian nightmare with every passing mile. Cities lay abandoned, their streets filled with remnants of lives that had been interrupted. The world they had once known was gone, replaced by desolation. At night, they camped in whatever shelter they could find, never staying in one place for too long. The air was thick with tension. They couldn't afford to rest for too long, not with the virus still out there, not with the possibility that they could be walking into a trap. The closer they got to the hidden facility, the more uneasy they became. The mountains loomed ahead, dark and intimidating. It was hard to imagine that anything could be hidden in such an inhospitable place, but the reports seemed to suggest otherwise. When they finally reached the location, they were met with nothing but silence. The facility, an old research lab abandoned long ago, stood at the edge of the mountain. It was overgrown with weeds, the walls cracked and decaying, as though time had forgotten it. But Lucas felt a strange sense of urgency as he stepped inside, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside, the facility was eerily quiet. The lights were dim, and the air was heavy with dust. Old computers lined the walls, their screens flickering faintly. There were signs of hurried activity, like someone had been here recently, but they had left in a hurry. They scoured the facility, hoping to find something, anything, that would tell them more about the virus and its origins. It wasn't long before they found what they were looking for, a hidden laboratory, its doors sealed shut. Inside, they uncovered a set of files that confirmed their worst fears. The virus had been engineered by a group of scientists, working for a covert organization with deep ties to the highest levels of government and military. The files revealed that the organization's plan was even more far-reaching than they had imagined. The virus wasn't just designed to weaken humanity physically. It was a tool to break people's minds, to erase their will and make them obedient. It was part of a larger plot to control the world, to subjugate entire populations and create a new order. The realization hit Lucas like a thunderclap. The virus wasn't just about population control, it was about total domination. Whoever had created it wanted to reshape the world in their image. They wanted to break humanity's spirit, strip away free will, and replace it with obedience. The infected were just the first step. Once they had enough control, they would move on to the rest of the world, turning everyone into mindless soldiers. Maya looked at him, her face pale. "We have to stop this. We can't let them win." Lucas nodded. He knew the battle was far from over. Finding the source of the virus had only raised the stakes. The organization behind it was powerful, and they would stop at nothing to achieve their goals. But Lucas wasn't willing to let them succeed. Humanity's future was at risk, and if they didn't act now, the world would never be the same. They didn't have much time. The virus was still mutating, spreading, and the world was running out of hope. But Lucas was determined to fight back. The next steps were clear. They needed to expose the organization, reveal the truth to the world, and stop the virus before it could take full control. But it wouldn't be easy. The enemy was watching, waiting, and they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who stood in their way. Lucas and Mia prepared for the hardest fight of their lives. The odds were against them, but they had something the virus didn't: the will to survive. And Lucas was determined to use that will to stop the enemy, to save humanity, and to ensure that the world didn't fall into the hands of those who sought to destroy it. The days following their discovery were filled with a renewed sense of purpose, but also growing fear. The world was hanging by a thread, and Lucas and Mia now understood that the fight was far from over. The organization behind the virus had orchestrated everything with precision. The virus wasn't just a weapon. It was the first step in a larger plan to control humanity, to create a new world order where free will was eliminated and only obedience would remain. The infected were just the beginning. The information they had uncovered in the hidden lab painted a terrifying picture. The virus was just one part of the puzzle. There were other facilities, scattered across the globe, each working on different stages of the plan. The organization had anticipated every move, and the world was on the brink of being completely reshaped in their image. But Lucas and Mia weren't ready to give up. They had spent years studying the virus, understanding its mutations, and researching every possible cure. But now, their goal had shifted. They weren't just searching for a cure. They were on a mission to stop the organization, expose them for what they were, and put an end to their plans once and for all. The first step was to get the information they had uncovered to the right people. But with the world in chaos, that wasn't an easy task. Governments had collapsed, communication systems were unreliable, and the military forces that remained were either overwhelmed by the virus or under the control of the very organization they were trying to fight. The network of resistance groups was small, fractured, and scattered across the world, making it almost impossible to coordinate any kind of effective counterattack. Still, Lucas and Mia knew that they had to try. The world needed to know the truth. They couldn't let the organization go unchallenged, or humanity would be lost. They began reaching out to the underground networks, sending messages to other survivors, trying to build a coalition of resistance groups that could stand against the enemy. They knew it would be dangerous. There was no telling who was still loyal to the organization or who had been corrupted by the virus's effects. But it was their only chance. As the days passed, they managed to make contact with a few key leaders of resistance cells in various parts of the world. It was slow going, but progress was being made. The more they connected, the more they realized how widespread the organization's influence had become. The virus had not only ravaged the population, it had allowed the organization to infiltrate governments, military bases, and even global corporations. They had used the virus as a means of destabilizing the world, making it easier to take control. But there was hope. The resistance groups were small but resilient. They weren't willing to give up, and neither was Lucas. They had a plan to strike back. It wouldn't be easy, and they knew they would be up against overwhelming odds, but it was a plan. Lucas and Mia began to piece together a strategy, using the information they had uncovered to expose the organization to the world. They would leak the data to the surviving media outlets, send it to anyone who could get it into the right hands. It was a risky move, but they had no other choice. If they could expose the truth, maybe the people of the world would rise up against the organization. Maybe the resistance could rally enough support to take back control. But time was running out. The virus was still spreading, and every day the infected became more numerous. The organization had not stopped its work. They were still developing new mutations, still advancing their plans. It was only a matter of time before they had the strength to finish what they had started. The night before they were set to release the information, Lucas sat alone in the lab, staring at the data on the screen. He felt a deep sense of dread. The world they had known was gone. They were now living in a different reality, one where survival was uncertain, and every step forward was met with danger. The stakes had never been higher. He knew that if they failed, humanity might never recover. Mia entered the room, her face grim. "Are you ready?" she asked quietly. Lucas nodded, though he wasn't sure if he was. "I have to be." Together, they sent the information out into the world, contacting as many resistance leaders and independent journalists as they could. It was a long shot, but it was the best chance they had. They didn't know if the world would listen, if the people would rise up, but it was their only option. The days that followed were filled with tense anticipation. The world was already on the brink of collapse, and the truth, when it finally reached the ears of the surviving population, only made the situation more volatile. People were angry, scared, and desperate for answers. But despite the chaos, something unexpected began to happen. Resistance groups started to unite. Governments that had once been fractured began to respond. There was a shift, a sense of unity that hadn't existed in months. But the organization wasn't going to let this happen without a fight. They had seen the leak. They knew what Lucas and Mia had done, and they weren't about to let two people stand in the way of their plans. Lucas and Mia were marked targets now. Their every move was being watched, and the enemy would stop at nothing to eliminate them. But despite the danger, they pushed forward, helping to coordinate strikes against the organization's remaining facilities. The resistance, though outnumbered and outgunned, had found new strength. The people of the world were beginning to rise up, to fight back, and to reclaim what had been taken from them. It wasn't going to be an easy fight. The organization had deep roots, and their power was vast. But humanity had something that the virus and the organization could never take away: the will to survive, to fight for freedom, and to protect what was theirs. Lucas and Mia, exhausted and battered from their long journey, knew that the road ahead would be difficult. The final battle was still to come, but they were no longer alone. The world was waking up, and humanity was preparing for the fight of its life. The virus had shattered civilizations, and the world had been brought to the brink of destruction. But in the face of unimaginable odds, humanity had done the unthinkable. They had fought back, and as long as there was breath in their lungs, they would continue to fight. This was far from over. The war for the future had just begun. In this final part, the resistance rises as the truth behind the virus is exposed, and the battle for humanity's survival continues. Lucas and Mia's efforts lead to a global movement to fight back against the organization, but the enemy is still powerful. The stage is set for the final confrontation, and humanity's survival is on the line. The hope for victory is fragile, but the will to survive is stronger than ever.